Do we have 3 or 4 minutes?
My name is Bill Caldwell, and I am a member of Speak Out Seattle. Also, for all of those people who are watching on YouTube, we are streaming this live in case the room gets too full and we have to ask people to not come in if we go over the limit of 200 people. Tonight's forum will also be archived on the Speak Out Seattle YouTube channel. You can easily go back and watch your favorite parts or share with your neighbors or other people who cannot attend. So before we get started, we'll start with some housekeeping. We are very thankful to the Northwest African American Museum for making this space available to us. And for their generosity in helping us host for all the people in District 3. One important notice is that there is a parking lot just adjacent to the building, and any cars that are parked in those spots that are marked resident parking are subject to being towed. So if you're in the lot that's right exactly next to the building and it says resident parking, your car might be safely stored somewhere else after the event. The restrooms are just outside this door. You take a left and take another left. And we would also ask at this time that anybody who has cell phones or pagers on them, if they could put them in a mode that is silent or on vibrate, and the candidates too. That would be helpful. Lastly, we are going to have a majority of tonight's questions for the forum come from the audience members. Our group, Speak Out Seattle, is going to ask 2, but we'll probably ask like 10 more or 12 more, depending on the amount of time available. If you didn't have a chance, you write down your question on a 3x5 card. We give them to the moderator, and then the moderator sorts them into categories and submits to the candidates. Let me tell you a little bit about Speak Out Seattle. Speak Out Seattle is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, truly grassroots citizens advocacy group. We have over 2,300 members from each area of Seattle. We're fortunate to have members of every race, gender, and age. We welcome people from all across the political spectrum, as long as they agree to our main group norm of respectful communication. In truth, we hear that a large percentage of our members have never been politically active before in their life, but they want to get involved now because of Seattle's current state of affairs. We believe people should be able to discuss their issues, even if they disagree on them, in a civil manner, and that we should be open to learning from each other. We advocate for evidence-based and compassionate approaches to addressing the important and very pressing issues of public safety, homelessness, and addiction. We focus on these issues because we love our city. We want it to be safe for our families, our children, and all of our neighbors, those who are housed and those who are not housed. We're especially concerned for those who are vulnerable and at risk of being harmed or of causing harm to others due to untreated mental illness or addiction. More information about Speak Out Seattle can be found at the welcome desk that you walked by as you came in, or you can look us up on the web or Facebook. Tonight, however, we're here to let you learn about each of the candidates who are running for City Council, District 3. We invited all 7 candidates, and we are very grateful that they've given their time to be with us tonight. We're very thankful for that and appreciate it. And we're very appreciative for all the people from District 3 who've shown up to hear and join us. We hope the forum educates us all about the candidates and their ideas for serving Seattle if elected. Thank you. Before we get started, let's recognize that many volunteers from Speak Out Seattle are donating their time and resources to put this candidate forum on, as well as forums in each of the other Seattle 6 districts, so we've done them in each district. Wrapping up, I promise. We're also thankful for the staff of the Seattle Ethics and Elections Committee. They accepted our invitation to be with us tonight, and actually they've come to all of our forums. There's Annie back there and Margita. They are with the SEC. So if you have any questions about the democracy voucher program, people get those in the mail, those are the experts. They're also the experts on campaign rules, and if you want to be a candidate yourself, if you want to run for something, they are the people to talk to. So they're available after the event. So to get the forum started, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight, Essex Porter. Most of you will already recognize him as coming to you from Channel 7 Cairo TV News. Essex is a well-respected and experienced reporter who is assigned to cover government and politics for Cairo 7 TV. He began his broadcast career at KLMS Radio in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then served as a television reporter for KETV in Omaha and KATU in Portland before joining Cairo. Essex has lived with his family here in District 3 for many years and is very familiar with Washington State, Seattle, and District 3 political and social concerns. He is not affiliated with Speak Out Seattle, but we're very thankful that he accepted our request to serve as an independent moderator for tonight's forum.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Glad you are all here. Welcome. Just a few words before we start. As Bill said, one of our foundations tonight is just to be respectful of each other. We will, some of the questions will be tough. Some of you will have feelings about the answers. We don't ask you to be emotionless, but do be respectful of each other and the times that we get as many questions through as we can. And so that does mean try to refrain from applauding or cheering for proposals or responses of the candidates. Every moderator says that. It never happens. But if you can just keep it down and keep it short, we will be fine. For the candidates, Most all the questions, you'll get a response time of a minute, except for the opening question, where you'll get just 30 seconds for a response. That's just really to introduce yourself. To keep track of the time, candidates can see it, maybe many of you can't. There's a time clock with huge numbers on it. Even if candidates are not wearing their glasses, they can tell how much time they have. So they have every opportunity to know exactly when they need to wrap up. And there's also a volunteer. She's going to give you, all the candidates, a 10-second warning when there's just 10 seconds to go. Oh, and we should tell the candidates, it's not a countdown clock. So it counts up to your 1 minute answer. So I'm going to just introduce each candidate by name, and then after I say all the names, we do welcome and encourage your applause. We will do the first question in alphabetical order, and then we'll just alternate to see who gets to answer a question first. Not every candidate should be, not a single candidate should have to answer the question first every time. We should give each of them a chance to think about it at least some of the time. And Speak Out Seattle has some introductory questions to start things off. There's really just a couple of those. Then we'll go to questions from the audience and from me, and I'll try to, if I ask a question, I'll try to remember to identify that it really comes from me, and if it's an audience member, I'll say from an audience member. We apologize in advance. Not all the questions are going to get answered. There's a pretty big stack here. I'm not going to hold it up because it is in some sort of order, and if I move them, I may not remember what order they are in. Occasionally, hopefully only occasionally, I'll follow up a little bit with candidates just to get them to clarify an answer, or if they've answered partly and maybe I think you'd all like to know the complete answer. So first, just introductions, and again in alphabetical order. And I'm just going to say names because they will introduce themselves more fully in just a moment. But our candidates this evening: Logan Bowers. And Sarah, help me with your last name. Barreriton.
Correct.
Sarah Barreriton, Zachary DeWolf, Pat Murakami, Amy Nguyen, Egan Orion, and Shama Solomon. All right, easy question first. Tell us who you are and why you are running. It's 30 seconds.
Hi everyone, I'm Logan Bowers. Over the last decade, we've seen our city descend into housing affordability and homelessness. Is this? Oh, thank you. How's this? Better? All right, I'm Logan Bowers. Over the last decade, we've all seen our city descend into housing affordability and homelessness crises. Yet this council is moving backwards, not forwards, and has struggled to even appoint a human services director. We can solve these problems, but we need a council that tries. We've elected political insiders and opportunists who promote themselves over the needs of our city. This time, we need someone different. I am a leader that delivers results and elevates the voices of those who have been ignored. Doing nothing is not an option, and I get things done.
I'm Sarah Brereton. I'm not twittering. So, STEM programs, trade, small business ownership are proven to break intergenerational poverty. In 2017, 63% of homeless engaged during sweeps turned down housing. That's unacceptable. We must afford people the dignity of personal responsibility as we offer them a hand up. No elder in D3 should be displaced from their home because they can't afford to pay taxes. I'll push for audits of all tax-funded nonprofits and community organizations in D3. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Zachary DeWolf. I'm a citizen of the Chippewa Cree Nation, and I'm currently your Seattle School Board Director. Honored to work on behalf of students, teachers, and their families. I'm actually running for Seattle City Council now because our representation isn't working for all of us. We need leadership that is focused on solutions. In Native culture, we often talk about the 7 generations principle, which says that what we do now must create positive and sustainable solutions for today and 7 generations into the future. I will find a way for us all to work together to create a Seattle for everyone, even if we disagree, because every neighbor has value and every neighbor deserves to be heard by their elected officials.
Good evening, I'm Pat Murakami. I'm running because I want to bring my progressive, practical solutions to the problems that Seattle is facing today. I am running because I have witnessed residents of District 3 being overlooked and disregarded by the city. I'm running because I care about everyone. No one should be living in tents, ramshackle RVs, or sheds. Everyone deserves solutions to solve our problems, and our council has failed to do that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Nguyen, and I'm the daughter of Vietnamese refugees. I grew up relying on governments, including food stamps, cash aid, and free breakfast and lunch at schools. I know what it means and feels like to not be heard, and as a public defender and former tenants' rights attorney, I work with the most vulnerable communities, including communities who are homeless, fighting addiction, and also suffering from mental illness. I want to bring my personal and professional experience to the City Council because it's important to make sure that the policies we set actually works on the ground. Thank you.
All right. Hello everyone, my name is Egan Orion. I am the founder and the organizer of the Pride Festival, which is the largest single festival day in all of Seattle. I'm also the executive director of the Capitol Hill Chamber of Commerce and the Broadway Business Improvement Area. I spend every day working in my neighborhood, making sure that the streets are clean, making sure that businesses are prosperous, and that citizens are heard and represented. I don't feel that's happening right now at the city level, so I stepped up to run. Thank you.
This year's election will be a referendum on one question: who gets to run Seattle? Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce, or working people? The political establishment have utterly failed to address the affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Seattle needs rent control, tax big business, not working people, to fund a massive expansion of social housing and homeless and mental health services. But to win any of this, working people will need to build fighting movements just like we did to win the $15 minimum wage and many renters' rights.
Question 1, and let's say we're going to rotate these down the line. So, Mr. Bowers, you'll go first. From Speak Out Seattle, what lessons did you learn from the Seattle City Council's effort to implement and employ hours tax or head tax?
Yeah, so I think there's a really important lesson to take away from the failed implementation of the head tax, which is people don't like taxes as punishment. They like taxes as a means to a solution. And the reality of the employee head tax was that it would not solve a problem facing our city. Most of the money would have gone into permanent supportive housing. But we have a housing shortage of 30,000 units, and it would have only been enough money to build a few hundred units a year. It would have been a drop in the bucket. You would have seen no change in your environment. Another slice of the funding, a much smaller slice, would have gone to homeless services, but it was not enough to move the needle. It was only about $25 million a year. We need about $150 million a year to adequately address homelessness. So again, proposing a divisive, controversial tax to not actually solve a problem. That was the lesson I learned. People want an actual problem solved.
Hello. I supported the repeal of the head tax. It was an attack on big business, which I do not support. Any attack on any business. It had no solutions to homelessness. I think that what we need to have is accountability. with organizations that offer these services. And I have been homeless myself with my wife and my children. We were homeless 3 times in 10 years. And the fact that we were homeless 3 times in 10 years should tell you something about the dysfunctional system. I think that we need to focus our tax dollars on substantive results, and we are not getting those results. It just came out this year that still we're seeing an increase in homelessness. They are sheltered, but this is not a solution, and we are spending $90 million for programs that aren't having any impact on the problem that we have on the streets. Thank you.
Look, big business has to do more to pay their fair share, but this policy was tried in 2006, twice in 2014, and in 2017 and in 2018. We've spent a lot of great and important time on unsuccessful policy, and it's important to note that the Progressive Revenue Task Force created recommendations other than that tax that we have not talked about. Every day we talk about this unsuccessful policy, we have not talked about the other ideas, which are increasing the local estate tax, which is actually expanding the progress made for the REIT, which is looking at vacant properties, second homes. Something I'm actually very interested in piloting potentially is looking at our fees and fines and basing them on income. Thank you.
I think the experience with the head tax points to an ongoing problem. The city council does not speak to the constituents before passing legislation. I would never approve of a tax on gross revenue. There are businesses operating on razor-thin margins, and we would be destroying living wage jobs if that had passed. Instead of taxing local businesses that are providing living wage jobs where revenue stays in the city, we should be taxing foreign mega corporations buying Seattle up from underneath us. If we tax the Spanish firm that just bought a huge parcel in downtown Seattle for $740 million, we would have generated $111 million in foreign tax revenue at a rate of 15% like Vancouver, BC does. We would have been able to build 111 affordable units now.
Having once again come from a community where I felt never heard, the head tax situation showed that we're diverse communities, and we want to be heard from our representatives and by our representatives. And we are also a community that cares about the homelessness crises, and we're willing to put our hard-earned cash and incomes into solving the crises together. But in making the solutions and finding the right solutions, we also need to make sure that each of us are heard. And both sides, yes and no for the head tax, came out feeling very upset because nobody was heard. It was a rushed process, and a lot of people felt that there were a lot of backdoor conversations. We need to make sure that we hold these city council accountable and make sure that they represent and speak to constituents of the city. And if elected, that's exactly what I'll do, and make sure to speak to constituents, because at the end of the day, we ended up passing the housing levy tax, which provided over $200 million for the homelessness crises. Thank you.
One thing that we all want in healthy, vibrant communities, or that we at least say we want, is jobs, and jobs that pay a living wage. So I found it a little crazy how we've been attacking businesses that create jobs, living wage jobs. That seems to be just so crazy. And we actually had council members flying back to New York City to shame one of the companies that was founded here. Now, I don't think that big business does the right thing every time. And I definitely don't think the government does the right thing every time. But I think that it's about having a conversation. It's about bringing all folks to the table, from businesses to nonprofits to residents and government alike, and seeing what we have in common and how we can push the city forward. And I think in the head tax debate that a lot of that was lost, and it was a big cluster, to be honest. So that's it.
Seattle has the most regressive tax system in the entire nation, which means working people and small businesses bear the brunt of it. The Amazon tax would have taxed the top 3% of the businesses in this city, not small businesses, not working people, to fund one of the only rational things that can work to address skyrocketing rents and the homelessness crisis, which is expand social housing, which is publicly owned affordable housing and funding for homeless services. The problem with the Amazon tax was not that it wouldn't have worked, but that our movement angered the Chamber of Commerce and Jeff Bezos and the billionaire class, and they bullied and threatened our city. And instead of standing with our movement, shamefully, Amazon's mayor, Durkin, and 7 of the 9 council members capitulated to big business and repealed it. But that same year, last year in November, 3 cities in California won similar taxes, which means when we fight, we can win, but we need to build powerful movements to fight big business.
Our second question.
Respectfully ask that she stops yelling at us.
The microphones do carry well. Each candidate can make a decision which you can accept or reject as to how they present themselves, as long as they do so civilly. Second question from Speak Out Seattle. The Seattle Police Department is losing officers to attrition and having difficulty hiring officers. In your opinion, why is this happening? And what, if anything, should be done to address this problem? And Sarah Burton, you are first to answer this one. Sarah?
Oh, I am?
Yep.
Here's a quote from our current elected representative. African American community members are overwhelmingly, disproportionately targeted. Fatal police shootings, arrests, and mass incarceration. Now I agree, mass incarceration does disproportionately impact African Americans. Arresting also does as well. But I don't think that we should have an elected representative who attacks our police officers publicly. I've been to local protests. Actually, I used to protest in some of Shelma's protests. But I've been to my own little personal counter protests, and to hear some of the vile things that come from people's mouths that are directed at our police officers, it's out of line. These people are human beings. They work hard for us, and they show up when we call them and we need their help, and we need to support them.
Oh, a question, yes. Seattle Police Department is losing officers to attrition and having difficulty hiring officers. In your opinion, why is this happening? What, if anything, should be done to address the problem?
Yeah, this is a great question. You know, I think part of what is really important is that we have to thread this needle very carefully, and I speak particularly for Black and Brown and LGBTQ communities, because we have a certain troubled history with police and the criminal justice system. So we have to be very thoughtful about the answer being more cops. The thing I'm interested in is making sure that our police force represents the communities they're serving. Currently, there's news recently that the Community Service Officer program is reinstated. My friend Sabrina Burr talked about how this program was back from a long time ago, and it was really important because what it did was it brought the police force out to the communities, met folks, built community trust, and frankly, that's a huge thing. We need to name the things that are happening wrong in the police force, the police department. There's certain things that are happening still today that feel they're antithetical and unjust, so we need to name those. As Mr. Rogers says, if it is mentionable, it is manageable. We need to bring those issues to the front, talk about them, and make sure that our police force represents the communities they're supposed to be serving.
I'm in my 10th year as the president of the South Seattle Crime Prevention Council. I am on record of supporting the police when they do the right thing and standing up against them when they are wrong. I have the harassing emails to prove that I'm responsible for the removal of a racist captain and sergeant at the South Precinct, and I will do it again. But just because one or two officers are bad doesn't mean the entire department is. We need to show our police officers that we honor and respect them and appreciate that they put their lives on the line for us every day. And no complex society can survive without police officers. I want a program to encourage more officers to come here, including a home buying program where we buy down the down payment. And I want that program not just open to first responders, but teachers and any one of you that's renting and doesn't own property. Large corporations shouldn't be the only people building wealth in this city. We all deserve that opportunity. We need officers that reflect the faces of the members of our community. We need to be recruiting from within our own high schools.
My experience growing up in a low-income neighborhood, definitely there were times when I saw great police officers helping the neighborhoods, and there are also times when we struggled to see the officers who would push my friends against the car and be quite brutal with them. And as a public defender, and representing thousands of people, we see the same. There are some amazing police officers where I tell my clients, you're lucky to be alive today based on what I've seen in the facts. On the other hand, there are other police officers who I think require a little bit more training or for somebody to look into a little bit more about how they're going about their jobs. But what we need to understand is in the long run, we need the police department to work with the community and make sure that they are respected. When a police officer responds to a situation and if they feel a high anxiety, that leaves no one safe. And so we need to make sure that we work together on the police side and the community side to create a working environment. Thank you.
I think one of the reasons that we're losing officers, not able to retain them. Is it this one?
Nope.
Nope, sorry, I'm supposed to leave that there. All right. Sorry, I'm running away from the feedback. I think over the last 10 or 12 years, I think you've seen the job of a police officer in Seattle change a lot. And so they're not only cops anymore. They actually used to walk the beat in Seattle. They don't do that anymore. They're in their squad cars and on motorcycles. They play many roles. They're social workers, they're counselors, oftentimes they're the first responders. So I think that a lot of cops have gotten burnt out, and the booming economy has also not been able to keep up with pay for them. But what I would say is, I think that we do need to round out our social services with more folks that can serve people that are not cops. There's places in Black, Brown, and LGBTQ communities who also deserve to be safe. Who need representation, people that they can chat with, and it's not always going to be a cop. So, anyways, thank you.
African American and indigenous community members are overwhelmingly disproportionately targeted in fatal police shootings, arrests, and mass incarceration. Seattle police shoot and kill more people each year than the police forces of many countries. The city's political establishment unfortunately just approved a police contract last year that rolls back hard-won accountability measures with only my dissenting vote. I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and the No New Youth Jail movement in demanding a democratically elected community oversight board in Seattle with full powers to hold the police accountable, including setting department policy and procedure. We should also note that Seattle already spends a big proportion of the city budget, $400 million on the police department. We need to expand funding for constructive rehabilitative programs like the enforcement assisted diversion, which I have fought for and won funding, but it is not enough. We need to fund Career Bridge.
This particular question is. Hey. All right.
Thanks, Isaac. So yeah, we do have a staffing issue on the police department. We have over 100 open headcount. And one thing I've learned from building many teams over my careers is understaffing begets even lower morale, because you don't have time to do a good job and do a thorough job, and no one likes to be under constant pressure and not be able to complete their work well. And so I think we need to set up the police force to be set up for success. Having a fully staffed police force means that they can spend more time in the community building relationships with the people they serve. That's a way to keep tensions from escalating. It means everyone's pulling together. It means that a fully staffed police department means police have more time to be walking their beat rather than driving from 911 call to 911 call frantically. And again, that means building more trust and more engagement with the community. I also think we need to be investing more in community service outreach for exactly that same reason. So those are some basic tactics that I would apply.
So those are Speak on Seattle questions. I'm going to throw in a question of my own. And it's a parallel question to the one we just had. And goes first to Zachary DeWolf. There's also turnover among the people who provide the social services needed to help the homeless, the mentally ill, those who are addicted to substances. What should be done to address that problem?
This is a great question. So I work at an organization called All Home, and I'm a program manager, and I focus specifically on youth and young adult homelessness, as well as diversion, which is an approach that helps people quickly resolve their experience of homelessness. What I will tell you is I manage 17 people to train in diversion across the county, and the things that they talk about are the fact that they are low-wage jobs. So we're asking people at the margins of poverty to continue to serve people that are either experiencing homelessness or also experiencing poverty. 40% of our neighbors have less than $400 to their name. One unexpected financial experience and their own experience of homelessness. We need to support these folks. We need to look at their health benefits. We need to make sure that they have cost of living increase. We need to make sure they have free transit passes. We need to make sure that they're prioritizing public and affordable housing. These are the things we need to do to support the people that are focusing on the most vulnerable in our community, and I will absolutely advocate for the folks that I get to work with every day.
Well, social workers and first responders are all suffering from PTSD. We need to support them and have free programs to help them with that before it becomes critical, before they're one of the drug addicts out on the street, before they become an alcoholic. My son, it was an EMT, he's now a paramedic. I have sat with him while he's cried for a half hour after dealing with a certain case. His life has been threatened. And if all of this work, whether it's first responders or social workers, caseworkers, is very stressful. I have 2 undergrad degrees because I was going to be a social worker originally. I couldn't even read the textbook of what one human being can do to another. So I have great respect for the work that they do. We need to honor them and be there for them. One of the things that we could do is have more volunteers to help support them. I was a member of the CASA program when it was originally a guardian ad litem. We can have other people in the community mentor and help with caseloads.
When I was working for a legal nonprofit as tenants' rights attorney, it was really hard, and I was making about $10,000 more average than the social workers. And while I was a tenants' rights attorney, I had to move 3 times to 4 different homes because I could not afford where I was living, or because where I found my rooms on Craigslist was just not a safe environment. And so when you're talking about people who are leaving their jobs because of the situation, I understand, and because that's something that I have gone through. Not only do we need to make sure that our support employees are getting wages where they can afford to stay in their city and live in a safe home, but we also need to make sure to understand that they're all dealing with secondary trauma. And as a public defender, I work with the same clients as them, people who are suffering from mental illness and also fighting addiction. And unfortunately, many of them are in their childhood suffered from assaults and sexual assaults. Thank you, I've run out of time, thank you.
So last year when I started my job with the Broadway Business Improvement Area, Capitol Hill just lost its homeless outreach workers that we'd had for a couple of years. So I reached out to my friends over in First Hill Improvement Area and also Chinatown ID because they had no social workers at the time either, to see if we could petition the mayor's office and council to bring those social workers back to our neighborhood. central to that whole exploration was the need to be able to pay those workers a good salary, enough of a salary so that they could live in Seattle. They work very long, hard hours, and some of the things that they experience on a daily basis are really tough to swallow, and they need as much support from us as possible. And they also build relationships, by the way, and those relationships last months and even years, and so we need them to stay in those jobs in order to be more effective and feel supported. Thank you.
The workers who serve the most vulnerable and marginalized are themselves living on the brink of homelessness often. We need revenues to fund living wages and decent benefits for those workers, but what they need is not kind words from politicians and candidates, but somebody with political will and a movement that will fight with them to tax the rich to fully fund their needs while they serve the most vulnerable. We also need to address the problem of affordable housing crisis, the sky-high rents, which is why we need a massive expansion of social housing, and which is why we need rent control. Last year, my office fought alongside the emergency medical technicians, the EMTs, who are employed by the for-profit American Medical Response Company, and we fought for a resolution that we won a unanimous vote on. They are members of Teamsters Local 763, and we have also, my office is joining the EMTs in demanding that all emergency workers be brought in-house into the public sector so that they can be paid decent wages and are not exploited by for-profit billionaires.
Let me ask our audience just to hold your enthusiasm a little bit, maybe so we can have enough time to get even more questions in.
So social work is really, really tough. It is a very challenging job. And no, we don't pay our social workers enough in this city for the tremendous work that they do for us. But there are two things beyond money that people actually value more from their job. And that's number one is respect. And number two is the feeling of accomplishment. So in this city right now, we have 11,000, or in the county, we have 11,200 unsheltered neighbors. We have service capacity for 6,000. We're putting our social workers in a really tough spot by chronically under-provisioning the system. We don't have enough services to meet the need. And so one of the strongest ways that we can support our social workers is by also adequately funding the system to address the need for homeless services that we have in this county.
We do not need rent control. What we do need is, I'll give you an example. I was living in, my wife and I and our kids were living in permanent housing, and one night I heard a ruckus downstairs. There was a young woman that lived down there with her son, and her boyfriend was beating the hell out of her, okay? So I called the police. Police show up, they get rid of the boyfriend. The next day I'm called in by my case manager, and she's asking me, hey, what happened? And I said, well, what are you gonna do about it? And she said, well, we're probably gonna move to evict her. And I said, I, in good conscience, am not gonna tell you what happened because I don't wanna be part of that. The policy, and it wasn't her fault, the policy is, and I've seen this multiple times, I've seen it particularly with women who experience domestic violence in transitional housing and in permanent housing, is when they experience that, what they do is they evict them and they cycle them back through the system. That must stop.
Our next question starts with Pat Murakami, comes from our audience. People of color are being pushed out of the Central District at alarming rates, especially black residents. What policies would you support to reverse this trend?
Well, MHA isn't helping. It was passed unanimously by all 9 city council members. It disproportionately impacts low-income people, people of color, long-term black residents of the CD. We need to preserve the diversity of property and home ownership in this city. So we need to rewrite that legislation. We need to go back to HALA, which was written by and for developers. 24 of the 28 members of the HALA committee were developers. That is not a diverse group. That is not representing the interests of small property owners in this city. Also, we need a program where we can freeze property taxes on long-term or multi-generational houses so that they stay in the family. When something is redeveloped, because we are growing, I want development done thoughtfully, and I want to protect legacy businesses and residents.
I agree in terms of if a family is owning property taxes, we need to make sure that there's a way for them, if they're having an income that did not predict for property taxes, we need to make it more accessible, the programs that we have that exempt low-income families from tax increases. In addition to that, for renters, I think that the city is in the best position that if development is going to happen, the city is in the best position to know who's living in that location right now and making sure that 3 years in advance before there's any development, 4 years in advance before there's any development, that we talk to the tenants and see what they would like to do. Instead of waiting until a few months before breaking ground and the tenants are being evicted, we need to make sure that we use the resources we have to find out what the community would like to do and not necessarily decide on their behalf either. Thank you.
So a couple months back, I visited the groundbreaking for the Liberty Bank building, which is a Capitol Hill housing project that's just off of 23rd and Union, where I live. And they were able to achieve in that affordable housing project 87% African American residency rate, which I think is fantastic. It's one of those tools which is called community preference, which can keep folks in the neighborhoods where they were raised, where they have family and friends and the services that they've connected to all their lives. So that's number one. Number two is I think that one thing that's key to keeping people in neighborhoods and keeping them prosperous is with small business support. The Postman, run by Kiana and Devon, just opened down the street from me. And Kim runs Raised Donuts, which is really good donuts, by the way. And a couple of doggy daycare places run by queer people. So that's one way to achieve that.
There used to be racist redlining in the central district, in the city, and now we have economic redlining where anybody who can't afford the sky-high rents, anybody who can't afford to continue paying the skyrocketing property taxes is pushed out of the city, and that often means our people of color community members. And that is why we need what we have with the Chateau Apartments on 19th and 4th who are working with my office to fight back, but we cannot have tenants in individual buildings fighting back and hope to win social justice. What we need is an alternative, a comprehensive alternative for the for-profit market which has failed us. That is why we need rent control, we need the Amazon tax for social housing, we need impact fees on corporate developers, we need a vacancy tax. 1 in 10 apartments is vacant in this city while people are struggling for housing. We need a property tax moratorium for working class and middle class homeowners, and we need public funding for backyard cottages so that retirees can fund their own retirement by staying in-house. We need to unite renters and homeowners.
So the reason we're seeing folks displaced from the central district as well as from other neighborhoods in the city is this. Over the last decade, we added 100,000 jobs to downtown Seattle alone. We added 45,000 housing units or so citywide. So the question is, where do the other 55,000 workers that arrive downtown live? And the answer is they displace someone else who makes less money than them. We have to balance the number of jobs and the number of housing units in the city so that everyone has a place to live. If we don't do that, we have a structural problem that guarantees someone's getting squeezed out. Now, the interesting thing is no amount of public dollars can fix that. The only thing that can fix that is zoning that the city decides. So the city decides if it's legal to build new housing units or not legal to build new housing units. And interestingly, the city decided disproportionately to put the new housing units in the central district. That's why we see additional displacement in that neighborhood. It's one of the neighborhoods that's growing faster. We need to spread the growth evenly throughout the city and accommodate enough to meet the jobs.
Liberty Bank is a necessary evil. It's a failure. And the reason why I say this is what we're doing is we're building low-income housing, right? And then we're touting what? 87% of residents at Liberty Bank are black. And people think that that's a wonderful thing. It's not. It locks people in low-income housing. What we need to have is African Americans moving into the Central District, being able to afford economically to purchase homes, STEM programs, trade schools, those types of things, small business ownership. Those are the things that break people from intergenerational poverty. I grew up poor. All of my family are still trapped in intergenerational poverty, and it took me 20 years to dig myself out of it. I owned a number of small businesses, and that's what helped get me out of it as well. But low-income housing is not a long-term solution.
The precision of our solutions must match the precision with which they are inflicted on black and brown communities historically. In the 1970s in the Central District, black and African Americans were 70% of the population. Today they are 18%. We need to make sure that we are allowing and making sure that our seniors and black and African American folks can stay here in this historically and traditional neighborhood that they've always lived in. I'm looking forward to working with Councilmember Mike O'Brien on ADU and DADU legislation to make sure there's income generating opportunities. We also need to think about shallow rent subsidies. I was really excited about building a proposal with Building Changes that allows for a long-term subsidy for 1 or 2 years for folks that have differing income levels. The other thing too is we are not talking to our neighbors about the fact that the King County Assessor's Office has a property tax relief program for seniors. The threshold is $67,000 in income. These are things we need to talk about, making sure we're promoting. We can keep our neighbors here because they deserve to stay here.
And this question, my own kind of composite of what I'm seeing from the audience when it comes to the homelessness crisis. And I think the audience is just looking for details. What is your approach for a solution that works for those who are homeless so that they have the safe and secure housing that can keep them off the streets, and for those who are their neighbors who are looking for safe and secure neighborhoods? Amy, when the question goes to you first.
Great, thank you. For the neighbors, a lot of us who are neighbors who are working, a lot of us are one paycheck away from becoming homeless. And so that needs to be a concern that we recognize. That once again, senior citizens who are living on an income that was not expecting the high rates of taxes coming in, who are so close to homelessness, we need to make sure that we create programs for them to stay in their homes, for workers to stay in their homes, and people who are low income to stay in their homes. I was fortunate to have Section 8 growing up, but the fears of losing that subsidy throughout childhood was a reality that still impacts me today. And regarding things that work for the homeless, I strongly believe that when we provide housing for the homeless, we also need to provide case management, because a lot of clients that I've worked with are not only dealing with homelessness, but also mental health issues and also drug addiction, and they need a helping hand to make sure that they can get out of it. Thank you.
I think all of us can agree that we don't want to see our neighbors sleeping in tents and in doorways in our city. No one should be sleeping on the streets. Now, how people arrive at that particular conclusion may differ, but if that's the end goal, then there's a number of things we can do. First of all, there's thousands of empty apartments and hotel rooms in this city that are unoccupied right now. So we need to incentivize those property owners to bring those back up to code so that the people who need a place to live can live in those today. I've also proposed a bond using our new governance model with the county where we could bond over 1,000 supportive housing units with wraparound services for our chronically homeless and vow to do it within 3 years. That is an essential tool.
If we were being honest about these things, then we would know that we don't need any more research. We know what works and what doesn't work. The causes of homelessness surveys nationwide show rent increases are very much linked to increases in homelessness. This is a nationwide phenomenon. Chronic underfunding of mental health services and services for people facing substance abuse. This is another cause of rising homelessness. We have 25,000 households in Seattle that are paying more than half their income in rent, which means they're one rent increase or one small crisis away from being made homeless, even though they're not homeless today. So we cannot duck the question of services plus affordable housing, funding for both of them. We need to tax the rich, even if you don't like the sound of it. That is the only rational solution, because we need alternatives to the for-profit market. And the only way we can address the housing and homelessness crisis is to fight for bold policy solutions like rent control and taxing big business. But we should also be careful not to demonize poor and homeless community members.
There is no one magic bullet that solves homelessness. It is very much an issue of the right tool for the right job. And by that I mean, a mother fleeing domestic violence with her kids has a very, very different need than somebody who's on the street with a substance use disorder. So homelessness response is fundamentally about pairing the right amount of services for the right groups of people based on their need at the moment. That's basic governance problem. That's blocking and tackling. The city council is an oversight body, so that's about setting goals, measuring against those goals. That's the basic governance that we're missing today. And when I'm out doorbelling and I meet people, I get an interesting perspective. And part of that blocking and tackling is the quality of the services we provide. So one woman I met, she works at Harborview. She said, "Logan, that's great, but do you have any idea how many homeless folks coming out of good shelters I have to treat for lice and scabies?" Like, we have to keep these basic things under control so that our services are effective.
Let's be clear, okay? The current homelessness crisis and chronic homelessness is not about affordability. It's about drug addiction and mental illness. That's what it's about. Over the years, I have struggled with bouts of deep depression, okay? And I have a wife and 4 wonderful children that have supported me along the way. When I walk out on the street and I see somebody slowly losing their mind in front of my apartment, there's not much distance between them and me. The only difference is I had support. And a lot of people don't have the support that I had. We as a people must give a hand up to people who are struggling. But we must demand of people that they take the steps necessary to extricate themselves from the problem too. We can't, this current policies infantilize homeless people, and it's disgusting.
Housed people cannot continue telling unhoused people what they need for their solutions. What we need to do is center people at the center of these issues and the solutions. And I will tell you some nerdy details here. In the 1970s, we were building 600,000 units of affordable housing. By the 80s, it was 10,000 units. We had a population increase, but we weren't building the same amount of affordable housing. And since 2010, we've lost 60% of the affordable housing stock in this country. Since the 1960s, rents have risen by 60%, and our incomes have risen by 5%. All I am saying is that the context is severe. The federal government, the state government, the county are not coming to save us. We need to do bold things. And one of those things is taking an idea from people experiencing homelessness, and that idea is diversion. They said, we just need one-time financial assistance to get out of our experience of homelessness. will you invest in this idea? And we did, and it is proving really successful. We're getting people out of homelessness faster for way less money, and it is deeply important that we're focusing these issues on the people at the center of these issues.
This is a major crisis and we need immediate action to help people. So I'm just going to talk about two of the many subsets of people out on our streets. The economically homeless, we can immediately match them with people, homeowners or apartment dwellers that have a spare bedroom, and give the people that will host someone free utilities. We can't do a property tax break, unfortunately. With regard to people that are suffering from mental illness and or drug addiction, they are living in vile, subhuman conditions. If I let my dogs live in those conditions, I would be arrested for animal cruelty. We need immediate residential treatment for these folks. And two of the things we can do, one, the nurses' dormitory across from Harborview could be purposed for that. We could bring in a used cruise ship, which would have immediate bedrooms, restrooms, kitchen facilities, everything you needed to have a treatment facility that would work, where we could positively impact these people's lives.
Okay, before we move on, let's do 2 or 3 lightning round questions, but on this issue, because I think people would like some clarity about some of the many suggestions and issues that are out there. So you've got the placards in front of you, yes or no. And first lightning round question: do you support sweeping homeless encampments? Okay, second lightning round question. Do you believe that homeless, substance addicted folks on the street should be forced into treatment? And final question, do you support safe consumption sites? Show the audience. Okay, so, all right, you know who has a yes or no and who doesn't. Okay, Egan or Ryan, the next question is for you. How will you address gangs and gun violence in the Central District?
So this is a matter that's dear to me. I've been living there myself for about 20 years around the intersection of 23rd and Union. So most of my adult life in the Central District has been about gun violence. And so we sort of expected with the new buildings and sort of what people would term, cleaner sidewalks, more vibrant, commercial spaces, that the gang violence would go away, and it has not. We've seen actually an uptick recently. Just a few nights ago, there was someone that was killed a block away from my house. I think that the SPD really needs to renew foot patrols in that area. I think there needs to be more surveillance. There's dealing going on the streets out there, and it's creating a turf war. And so there needs to be more monitoring of all that in order to create a safer neighborhood for everyone living in the Central District.
My deepest condolences to the family of Royal Lexing, the young black man who tragically lost his life to gun violence on Friday. And I stand with Seattle's black community in mourning this huge loss, and with community members who want to end gun violence. My husband and I live in the Central District Leschi neighborhood, and we hear gunshots. And in fact, one of the shootings this weekend happened just 2 blocks from our house. We need common sense gun control measures like banning semi-automatic weapons to prevent gun violence incidents like the ones that happened this weekend. Some community members have reached out to my office about traffic calming measures on the 21st Avenue section between Union and Marion. We're looking into that. But we also know that environmental design and gun control measures in themselves will be insufficient if we don't deal with the overarching problems in our society. Studies show that violence and public safety issues are closely linked to inequality, the homelessness crisis, the chronic underfunding of public schools and after-school programs, and youth programs and apprenticeship programs. We need to fund all of those fully.
So I think this relates really well to your previous question about the issue of staffing in the police department because, foot patrols and better community outreach are fundamentally how we build the relationships to catch folks who are perpetrating violence in the community. People within the neighborhood, some folks do know what's going on, some folks do know who's perpetrating it, and having those healthy relationships with the police department so they can work together to root out those elements is absolutely critical. And this is where I think we've seen this coming for months. This is an issue that started last summer and where we need to be investing in community service and more police to interact with the community, not necessarily to patrol, but to interact.
I lived at 23rd and Cherry with my family for about 5 years. We'd wake up in the middle of the night to drive-by shootings. From my perspective, people who engage in drive-by shootings are degenerates, and they should be hunted down by the police and thrown in prison. As far as firearm restriction, historically, firearm restriction was used against African Americans. It's a constitutional right to own firearms, and I think more African Americans should actually own firearms, as well as everybody else. But, this whole pick and choose about constitutional rights and which ones we should get to have and which ones we shouldn't get to have is a non-starter for me. We need to have more patrols by police, and I called for more patrols actually on Facebook when I owned my coffee shop, and I was told that, I was somehow calling for executions of African Americans on the streets. And that's not what it's about safety.
I've been thinking about this a lot since Friday. I know we had a few shootings here in our community. I think the first thing is we absolutely need to make sure that our community and our neighbors have their basic needs met, like housing and jobs, and they can get to where they need to safely and on time. We also need to make sure that we have re-entry programs for victims, so to make sure there's not re-victimization or retaliation. The other thing I'm really interested in is more upstream approaches. It can't just be more cop, but I will tell you this thing. I work at the Seattle Public Schools as a director, and the NAACP Youth Coalition has said one thing that they would really like to see: more counselors and mentors in our schools. The city can play a completely critical role in providing more resources for counselors and mentors in our schools. When a young person has access to somebody that sees them, that sees that they have value and wants to support them, their academic outcomes improve and they're less likely to get involved in these issues. The other thing is that we need to support programs that are already happening, like the Choose 180, and also youth employment programs. There's things that we can do more upstream, but frankly, gun violence is a deeply, deeply frustrating issue in our community that we can't just solve alone, but we need to work with our county, our state, and our federal partners.
I'm not speaking to the recent violence because those cases are still under investigation, but in general, with regard to gang violence, what do we expect but gun violence and problems when we have told our police department to stand down and allow illicit drug trading to happen every day, everywhere throughout our city? We have to do something about that. We have to accept our responsibility for the separation of families at the border with Mexico because we're bringing drugs we're buying drugs from the cartels, selling them on our streets. The way to solve so many social issues is to get people into treatment programs so that they're not doing the drugs and we're not buying these drugs. Even when drugs are legalized, like when marijuana dispensaries opened, a central area gang had opened a dispensary in South Seattle. Over 50 rounds were shot into that building. We have got to change What's happening on our streets now?
Similar to what Egan was expressing with his experiences growing up, I grew up in a racially segregated neighborhood, mostly immigrants and people of color. And it was normal to hear about the Bloods, the Crips, the gangs that still exist today and that I lived through as a child. And we need to make sure that I am an exception to the situation. I was able to have teachers and counselors who were able to encourage me to continue my education. That should not be an exception to the neighborhoods where I grew up in and what's going on for our communities right now with gun violence and gangs. We need to make sure that we provide youth programs and also, what was mentioned before, counseling at schools and social services at schools to make sure that if somebody does not have the 2 parents, 2 children, a dog atmosphere at home, that they have somebody to go to. And so we need to make sure that we take preventative steps to make sure that what we're experiencing today, we're not going to experience 15, 20 years from now. Thank you.
Next question, beginning with our answer, will be Sean Sawant. Question from the audience. Would you consider rolling back what this audience member calls the city's anti-landlord ordinances to remove a barrier to homeowners considering converting their single-family house to an accessory dwelling unit or a duplex or a triplex and encourage more housing diversity?
We absolutely need to make sure that we encourage homeowners and renters to get united to fight for the measures that can actually help alleviate the housing and homelessness crisis. And that includes very concrete questions on how homeowners can actually afford to live themselves in their homes and not have to leave Seattle, and at the same time build backyard cottages or accessory dwelling units so that they can get some income without exploiting renters, and at the same time it provides affordable housing for somebody else, for another family. But the biggest barrier that we face is not the zoning changes. Zoning changes are going to happen, they are coming up. The biggest barrier is what most council members and most candidates won't talk about, which is how will these, many of them elderly but middle class and working class homeowners fund the construction of backyard cottages in their homes. That's why we need to expand public funding to enable that, and for that we need progressive revenues, and for that you do need to talk about taxing the rich.
So the interesting thing about public housing is that it has to follow the same zoning codes that the city writes for private housing. So we have a zoning code right now that does not allow the creation of duplexes and triplexes in about somewhere around 70% of the city. And that what that means is that all the growth is concentrated into specific neighborhoods. As I mentioned earlier, we're short 55,000 housing units relative to our jobs. Some folks live outside the city. My estimate is we need to find about 30,000 housing units. If we legalize just 1 triplex per block citywide, that's 35,000 housing units. So imperceptible change for any given neighborhood, but completely solves our housing shortage. So it's these little changes in the zoning code. It is totally a land use decision that makes it either legal or illegal to have enough housing for people to live in.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Sorry. I apologize.
Would you consider rolling back what this audience member calls the city's anti-landlord ordinances to remove a barrier to homeowners considering converting their single-family houses to accessory dwelling units or duplexes or triplexes and encourage more housing diversity?
There's 2 things that really bother me about local politicians. 2 of them is they want to control property owners' right to do what they want with their own damn property. The second thing is they're always trying to get in your pocket. Those, anyways, so the issue that I see is an erosion of property rights with regard to homeowners being able to do whatever they want. I support people building cottages and you know, expanding their basement or whatever to offer that to the public. But what we need to really focus on, though, and I think that it's kind of a side thing from this, is if you think about all of the land that current sheds are covering that are housing people, we could house 10 times more of that in raised structures.
We absolutely need to encourage more and diverse housing types. I was on the Capitol Hill Community Council for 4 years as the president. We created the Capitol Hill Renter Initiative. One thing we talked about was the 1926 Supreme Court decision that actually defined zoning, which is really rooted in exclusion and racism. I will say this. When I was on the Capitol Hill Community Council, I was also part of this group called the Capitol Hill Champion, and we were working for the Capitol Hill Light Rail Station, the transit-oriented development above the light rail station. What was really exciting was that we worked with the state to make sure that 65% of the air rights above the light rail station was devoted to affordable housing. I'm interested in looking at the 105 schools we have across Seattle. Margaret Morales wrote Sightline very recently that a lot of our schools are completely surrounded by single-family zoning. It would be an exciting opportunity to decrease segregation in our schools, to increase the types of students in our schools. If we looked at the zoning around our schools, just to get creative, to say, this is where we can do some more missing middle housing.
I'm in favor of some rollbacks if they're done in a thoughtful way, but we have to consider a couple things. One, if somebody is selling a single-family home, that's more affordable than a single-family home with an attached accessory dwelling unit. And that's certainly less expensive than a home with both an attached and a detached accessory dwelling unit. So are we creating a crisis of less affordability? Blackstone, the world's largest landlord, is coming into our city and buying up single-family homes and renting them out. We need to enforce the ADU and DADU laws and make sure that a property owner is in the main structure any place that we allow this, and fine heavily when that doesn't happen. It's creating problems for the neighbors. We end up with bad neighbors because the landlord is absentee and not paying attention.
For most of my adulthood, I was either renting a room or I was renting a room or sharing a room with a friend because of affordability issues. And it's important for us to have different options because when I rented a room, that also helped the person who was renting from, who is a woman, senior citizen, who had an income that was not keeping up with the cost of living. And so that allowed me to not only be able to afford a place to rest my head, but also for the landowner, the property owner, she was able to pay her bills, which was increasing. So I definitely do believe that we should provide ADUs, DADUs, cottages, and so on like that, so that the property owners and homeowners can find alternative means of incomes, and also so that people like me can afford a place to stay. Thank you.
So we really need to expand the diversity of housing that we have available in the city, everywhere from small to the large. I think right now, for the new developments that are being built, it's either a single-family house or a townhouse or it's a large apartment building. I support expanding the urban village, and in those areas between the urban village and those single-family homes, we can put in duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes, and also condos where people with ADA accessibility issues can live on a single floor and seniors can age in place. It's not a matter of when we're going to start to expand the boundaries of zoning. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we should start with expanding the borders of these urban villages.
Okay, let's do a couple more lightning round questions. First one. The Seattle income tax is headed up to the Supreme Court. Do you want the city to win that case on the Seattle income tax? Yes or no? Sarah, I think it's upside down.
Oh, sorry about that.
All
Just
right.
ask if they're for or against it, that was confusing.
Yeah.
Are you
Oh,
for or
well,
against
just-
the city income tax?
So if you are for the Seattle income tax, hold up yes. If you are for it. And if you're not for it, you're holding up no. Okay. Another quick lightning round question. Would you support congestion pricing for downtown Seattle? Yes or no? Congestion pricing. I can't time the Jeopardy theme, but the time's just about running out. Congestion pricing, okay. Do you support the library levy? Supporting the library levy? Yes. Okay. Here's a question from the audience, and definitely a question away from much of what we've been discussing. And Logan Bowers, I think you get the answer first this time. Where does each candidate stand regarding only contracting with socially responsible corporations? The city's ordinance, and would it mean supporting firing Wells Fargo again, or not purchasing from Amazon?
So the best way to get a business to do what you want is to hit them in their wallet. Like, the businesses are fundamentally about profit, so they respond to the pressures of their customers. I think as a city, it is okay and oftentimes proper to purchase services with our values in mind. I think we have to be very clear about it. If it's going to cost us more money to do so, we have to be very transparent about how much money we're willing to spend to advance any given value or cause that we care about. And I think sometimes that will be a really good trade-off, and sometimes I think we will have to grit our teeth and buy from a vendor we would perhaps not be so excited to support. I think Wells Fargo is actually a great example of this because the city looked into alternative banks and there basically aren't any. So, you know, their practices aren't good, but also they're the most reasonable solution we have as a city. So, in moderation.
The notion of divestment makes good political fodder and grandstanding, but the reality is I actually think that there are a number of valuable resources that we can get from both small and large businesses. As a small business, what we would do is we would, I'd make these really gooey cinnamon rolls that were super duper good, and I'd give them to community organizations when they call and ask for them. That was what I could contribute. During the head tax debate, I was thinking, what can Amazon contribute other than the fact that they're contributing, $100,000 a year jobs to our economy, all that type of stuff, is I thought, why don't we get them to link up with community organizations and during the summertime, teach coding courses to students? Why don't we do something like that? Why don't we have mentorship programs for underprivileged students where they can hang out with an Amazon employee and have some sort of mentorship program for something like that? Thank you.
Our kids, young people, and students are watching us every single day. I was at an event on Friday and I met a adopted mom, and she said that one of her kids had seen a picture of me with my husband, and we had a baby in our hands. It's not mine, and I'm putting myself on the hook to say that we're not there yet, we're gonna be there. But to say that her adopted son had seen me holding a baby and he has not come out yet, and he felt really inspired about the fact that he could maybe see himself one day being a gay parent. And I tell you this story because young people are watching us. It is absolutely important we are living out our values. I agree with Logan on the fact that the place we put our dollars in our budget, if it speaks our values, that's deeply important. And young people are going to be watching us. It is not about necessarily purity, but we do have to make sure that if we're a city of values, we are one of the greatest cities in the world, that we need to double down on those. And sometimes that means working a little bit harder, a little bit longer, and getting creative about the things we are investing in and disinvesting in. And particularly as we think about fossil fuels, we have no other choice but to disinvest.
Well, divestiture is a tricky thing. I had a philosophical difference with the stance that Amazon was taking, and so I was willing to buy the items I wanted from eBay and pay a little more, and darn if they didn't come in Amazon boxes. So I think that, seriously. So I think what we need to do is be a global leader and work with the corporations and affect positive change in their behaviors, in what they do, in the actions that they take, and learn to work cooperatively with those that we're using for services, supplies, etc. I think that can be much more powerful and more positive in the long run.
Not enough socially responsible corporations or companies exist right now. So first we need to make sure that we invest in those companies who want and are working towards being socially responsible. Because not only is a small business already hard to fund, but a socially responsible one also. And so we need to be able to provide and invest in those so that even if it's not an option now, we're investing so that it can be an option in the future. And if it's not an option right now, then we should be working towards it being an option to invest and work with socially responsible corporations.
I'm all for using our city's buying power to reflect our values, but it's a little loaded when we say our values, because I think there's 500,000 different values in the city. And I know that the people on the left can generally agree about what our values are, but I think that that's just a fraught area that sort of came to mind when the question was asked. I think one thing that has been lacking these last 4 years with council is that there's not really been this spirit of bringing everyone to the table. There's been businesses and governments demonized depending on which side you're on. Even small businesses tend to be like somehow controversial sometimes. And I think that we can bring everyone to the table. We've got some huge challenges that we have to fight as a city, and if we come together, I think we can tackle them much more effectively.
My office has been part of the courageous movement led by Indigenous activists and the environmental rights organizations, and together we were able to win a unanimous vote to divest from Wells Fargo, to divest the city from Wells Fargo, which is a notorious corporation which exploits people of color customers. My office also has commissioned a study that has shown that, and the study results are out, that has shown that it is possible for Seattle to bank with not-for-profit cooperative banks, but we need to alter some of the city's banking procedures. But we're not going to stop there. Our movement is also fighting for a public bank, a municipal public bank, and Seattle is not the only city that's doing that. Many other cities are also on the way to fight for public banks. But I should also say, capitalism is not a system of good corporations versus bad corporations. Corporations generally are going to be exploitative because the whole system is rotten. The system cannot be made socially responsible. That is why, in addition to the reforms like public bank, like renters' rights, I'm also a socialist, and I think we need fundamental change.
Let's get the remaining answers in. All right, final question. Well, final question before we close. We'll get a chance to close. This comes from the audience, and Sarah goes to you. Will you support more taxes, or are Seattleites taxed enough? Now, all of you, I believe, do support the library levy. But beyond that, support more taxes, or are Seattleites taxed enough?
Well, it is a levy, meaning we're going to get to vote on it, right? So I don't support politicians who bully all of us and try to prod us into handing our money over. What I think we should do is if we want to pay more taxes, we as a people should vote on it. It's that simple. I don't think that the city council, I don't think that really most government should be imposing, well, on a federal level, it's a different story. But on a local level, I don't think that the city council should be imposing taxes. The soda tax, for example, I think it should be repealed. I think it's actually a regressive tax, right? Those who can afford soda economically tend to purchase soda different than, anyways. But that's all I've said. Thank you.
Can you ask that question again, Essex?
Yes.
I know it seems basic, I just want to make sure I answer it.
Question from the audience, will you support more taxes or are Seattleites taxed enough?
It is no secret that we live in the most regressive tax state in the country. So we absolutely need to look at that and make sure that we are right-sizing our taxes. That is why I do support a state income tax. That is why I do support a capital gains tax. And frankly, I was very disappointed we did not get a capital gains tax this year, because I will tell you a secret, that's not really a secret. Our public schools are underfunded, and it was an opportunity to make sure that they were fully funded. What I will say is this: property taxes do hurt people, do hurt some people very hard, very difficultly, and I'm speaking of seniors specifically, but there are relief programs. I think we need to make sure we're right-sizing it, and it's going to take a lot of work, so.
I guarantee you, we are wasting money in this city. I have an MBA. I have taught accounting courses. I want to be on the finance committee. I'm going to save us money. The reason I said no on the lightning round to the Seattle income tax is because it is poorly written, it violates the state constitution, and it only taxes the high income earners a little bit more. It still doesn't address the regressive system. I am in favor of a state income tax that's graduated, where there's no income tax on low income wage earners, but only if and only if, that is combined with reduction in sales and property taxes. That would make sense. That would take us into a more progressive tax system, and I promise to work for that. I'll get other municipalities, the rest of the city council, and go and lobby the state legislature to make that kind of a tax change happen.
I think we have reached a point where a lot of property taxes are actually causing homelessness or causing people to be displaced.
Yeah.
But I do believe that capital gains tax is an alternative rather than using more property taxes. The capital gains tax would make sure that in those situations, people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars in profits, whether from stocks or from the sales of homes or properties, that would be taxed. And so using that alternative would make sure that we keep people housed and remain in the house where they have been living their entire lives, raised their kids, and want to spend the rest of their lives in. Thank you.
So I think we should be taxed differently, not necessarily taxed more, but we have to accept the system that we've been given, at least in the short term, because we have a city to run. I think that one of the frustrations I've seen in the last few years when it comes to the city's budget is, and we've seen it, we saw it in the reaction to the head tax vote, is that the voters do not trust the city council to spend their money, and so they're not going to give them any more. So we need to audit the budget. There's bills that are owed to the city. We need to go and collect those funds. Even something simple as pet licenses. There's like half the city that are avoiding pet licenses, and we can collect millions of dollars in additional revenue if we would just do the basics of the books for Seattle.
The question, do you support more taxes, cannot be a class-neutral question in a society like the kind we live in. Seattle is deeply unequal, and Seattle and Washington State have the most regressive tax system in the entire nation, which means if you're working people, you pay a lot of your income in taxes, and if you're wealthy, you pay very little. if you're a big business like Amazon or Microsoft, actually you get money back. And that is why, and in fact, thanks to Trump's tax cuts, Amazon billionaires got $129 million tax rebate. You know, that means they got $129 million back from the government. How many of you, have you and I have ever got $129 million back? So in reality, we have to fight against these regressive tax systems. I voted against the solar tax because I believe it is regressive. We need to tax big business. We need to tax on the wealthy, but we cannot hold our breath for the state to do it. This is the same state that gave Boeing a $9 billion handout while selling us out. That's why we need to start the fight in Seattle.
One of the problems we have with, I think, this discussion in the city right now is we spend so much time talking about taxes and how we're going to use them to punish people, and it makes no sense. We don't implement taxes because we want to hurt someone. We implement taxes to buy a service on behalf of the people. So the question isn't, do you support taxes or not support taxes? Is what am I getting for it? What are we getting as a city for it? Is it worth it or is it not worth it? And so we need to be focusing the conversation on what are we buying with our tax dollars. And sometimes the answer will be, and that's where we need to start the conversation, is this is the price tag for ending homelessness in the city. This is the price tag for sheltering everyone. Do we want to pay for it or do we not want to pay for it? And we can have that conversation, but we should start with what we're buying for it. And I'll give you a quick example. So homelessness is a huge issue here. New York City has effectively sheltered almost 100% of their homeless people. They spend 2.5 times more money than we do per capita. Now, I don't think we have to spend that much money, but I think we can have a conversation of, do we want to have a more complete solution and spend more money, or a less complete solution and spend less money? And that's where the conversation should be.
All right, time to give each of our candidates a chance to close out. 1-minute closing statements, and Secretary Wolf, you start.
Thank you. My campaign is focused on listening, driving to solutions, and centering the people most affected by issues and the solutions. I want to be clear about something. We may not agree on everything or how to do it, but you will always be welcome in my council office. But centering the people most affected by these issues, particularly homelessness, means recognizing the fact that 194 of our neighbors died experiencing homelessness last year. 194 of our neighbors. Who is going to bring their names to these debates? Who is going to bring their voices and their names to City Hall? Who is going to make sure that those names and those people's lives have value? Names like Claudia Gutierrez, age 16, died by blunt force trauma. Andrew Caffroy, 32, died by hypothermia. Sur Nu, 55, lymphoma. Kanayalel Patel, 54, kidney failure. Chad Jones, 38, diabetic ketoacidosis. Violet Ortiz Wilson, 7 months old, sudden infant death syndrome. Elton Washington, 65, pneumonia. Kay Madison, 79, gunshot wound. Stanley Achalonu, 61, heart disease. Thomas Harris, 59, burned alive. And there are so many more names we have to make sure we're bringing into these conversations.
I really dislike lightning round questions on very serious questions that were asked tonight. So rather than a regular closing statement, I'm going to explain some of my answers. I said no to sweeps of encampments. I am in favor of them only if we can provide alternative housing for everybody that's in the encampment. I am in favor of forced treatment because there's actually a study by the National Health Institute that if somebody is given a choice between jail and treatment, they have a higher success rate than if they go into treatment voluntarily, and treatment is essential to turning people's lives around. I am opposed to safe injection sites. Listen, you don't let a toddler touch a hot burner. You would protect them from that. You don't remodel the kitchen and lower the stove so it's easier to touch. The same is true for safe injection sites. I carry a naloxone kit with me everywhere I go. I am prepared to save somebody's life. This is the attitude we have to take. We have to get treatment for people. I am willing and prepared, and I promise to work very hard for the people of this district. Together, we can do better.
Thank you for coming out tonight. And what I've been learning through the campaign is just how much people care. How much people care about our neighbors and how much people care about people like me. 30 years ago, when I 30-something plus years ago when I came to this life, our family struggled. And it was not until I went to college that I was able to reinvest and get further education so that I could dedicate my career to public service. 18 years is a long time to ask everyone for help. But with the right investments, right things can happen. If we work together, great things can happen. And so we need to make sure that if a person needs a helping hand, we provide it to them, and we have, and we need to continue to do that. But we need to continue to do that working together. 9 council members and the mayor working together, making sure that we're focusing on the same solutions together because we can get out of this homelessness crisis. Thank you.
Well, it's clear you're going to get someone very bright in District 3 as your next council member. That's for sure. There's a lot of great folks here tonight. I'm glad to be here with you all. Central to my campaign is the need to provide 24/7 low-barrier shelter to those who need it, and also to provide mental health and addiction services to all who need it. I think that sometimes gets lost in this conversation. I also think we need to get creative about our affordable housing crisis. There are other cities like Atlanta who use Open Doors, which is a program we piloted here, where you can get market rate apartments, but they're purchased by the city, and then we keep a stock of housing for ourselves so we can always place folks who are in need of housing there. And also we need to work with the county to bond 1,000 new supportive housing units. And we can pay that back with the general fund because we're paying that money over and over and over again right now. We have people languishing in our city streets, and we can do better by them. Thank you.
Speak Out Seattle, the organization, and the Seattle is Dying film have talked about evidence-based solutions, but have been doubling down on failed strategies. Mass incarceration, criminalizing homeless people, demonizing those facing substance abuse. These ideas are not only inhumane, they have resoundingly failed. Pushing failed ideas is the opposite of evidence-based. Seattle needs rent control, tax big business, not working people, to fund a massive expansion of social housing, transit, and services. Seattle needs to show real leadership against Trump's anti-worker, bigoted agenda by building movement of working people to fight big business, to make Seattle affordable for all, make Seattle ICE-free. I came here tonight because socialists believe it is important to participate when major debates are provoked by the crises of capitalism. However, I completely disagree with scapegoating the most marginalized in our society. If you are genuinely concerned about the failure of the establishment to address homelessness, you should fight for rent control and affordable housing and not fall for dangerous right-wing ideas.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. We've touched on a lot of complex issues, and to tackle these issues, we need council members that listen to their community, work together, and get things done. More of the same is simply not acceptable. We've gone from having high housing prices to a housing crisis. We've gone from housing instability to a homelessness crisis. Councilmember Sawant and the council failed to hold even half of their scheduled meetings to address this crisis. I bring something different. I want to make our city stronger. I'm not a political opportunist. I'm not a crusader for partisan ideology. I'm a problem solver, lifetime resident, and small business owner. I bring a career of finding solutions to difficult problems, and I get things done. Seattle has a $6 billion budget and over 10,000 employees. We need a leader that can deliver results in a large organization and elevate the voices of those who have been ignored. With your vote, we can achieve progressive solutions, real solutions to our city's problems. Let's get it done together.
I'm going to be reading from this. 60-second. Oh, sorry. No, it's Here's a 60-second distillation of what I have to say. STEM programs, trades, small business ownership are proven to break intergenerational poverty. Sanctioned tents and sheds is ceding defeat. We must afford homeless people the dignity of personal responsibility as we offer them a hand up. No elder in D3 should be displaced from their home because they can't afford property taxes. I'll push for an audit of all tax-funded nonprofits and community organizations in D3. We have a right to know if that money is being used effectively. No rent control. Let's stop political grandstanding. Let's repeal the soda tax and let's take back our seat.
That concludes our forum. Candidates, thank you all very much.
Thank you. A couple things before we go. One thing is that the Northwest African American Museum was so kind to give us this room at a low rate. There are some donation boxes in several areas. If you want to donate, that would be very helpful. We want to thank everyone for participating tonight, especially our moderator who took time out of his evening. We want to thank the candidates who were kind enough to all show up and come and speak with you. And we want to thank the audience for coming. Hopefully you learned a lot and can share with your neighbors and make a better vote in September. This is the last Speak Out Seattle Forum. We have them in each of the 7 districts. If you want to go back and see them, Steve was live streaming them on YouTube. Thank you.